Folks, today we're diving into a story that sounds almost like a small-town legend in real life. A capybara named Samba escaped from Marwell Zoo near Winchester, and a whole Hampshire village has basically turned into a live-action wildlife drill, chasing clues, drones, and whispers about where a 9-month-old rodent might be cooling off. If you've ever wondered what happens when a giant rodent goes rogue in a quiet countryside, this tale has some surprising layers and a few questions that stick with you long after the news cycle moves on. First up, the setup. Samba slipped through a gap in a temporary enclosure at Marwell Zoo, just after arriving from Suffolk. Not only is Samba on the loose, but another capybara, Tango, escaped at the same time and was found nearby. The zoo and local teams are treating Samba as still potentially nearby, and there's a real sense of urgency. Teams are working around the clock, drones are on standby, and people are checking gardens, ponds, and outbuildings as sightings come in. What makes this really interesting is how a single escape can cascade into a community-wide event. Personally, I think this isn't just about tracking an animal. It's about how people respond when an unusual animal enters their ordinary spaces. The village isn't just a backdrop here, it's an active participant. People are sharing sightings, coordinated searches, and even a bit of local excitement that you'd normally reserve for a sports match or a festival. What many don't realize is that wildlife management in suburban and rural areas often relies on improvisation. A drone here, a heat-seeking device there, and a public that's unusually compliant about reporting. These elements come together to form a modern-day search operation with a distinctly human twist. From my perspective, the use of drone technology by the University of Southampton in collaboration with Marwell Wildlife is a microcosm of a broader trend. We're seeing more partnerships where academic tech meets practical conservation. Drones give you aerial perspective over hedgerows and water bodies that would take multiple ground teams hours to survey. But a drone is not a magic wand. It's a tool, and it relies on visibility and history. The deeper point is about how authority and trust operate in a moment like this. Locals report sightings, the zoo communicates clearly about safety, and the science team translates data into actionable next steps. That coordination matters because it turns a potentially chaotic situation into a manageable, repeatable process. A detail I find fascinating is Samba's likely instinct to gravitate toward water and safety. Capybaras are semi-aquatic and notoriously chill in many environments, but this is a high-visibility escape. What this really suggests is that even in a humane, zoo-managed crisis, animal behavior remains the wild card. If Samba is drawn to water, that could shape where search efforts focus in the coming hours: ponds, streams, or anything that resembles a safe retreat zone. From a broader lens, this taps into how wildlife adapts to human-altered landscapes. It's not just about recapturing Samba. It's about understanding how species, like capybaras, navigate edge habitats, and what that means for late-night road safety, especially for anxious drivers who might encounter them near quiet lanes. The public-facing angle adds another layer. The ship in Aylesbury became a sort of beacon for the saga, with a local sighting described as a moment of "tweet but shouldn't be out." That tension, the mix of delight and concern, captures how communities process unusual wildlife events. And the role of public communications is crucial here. The zoo is clear that capybaras aren't a danger to people or pets, but they urge caution and not to approach the animal. That balance matters because missteps can lead to dangerous situations or, at minimum, a longer chase that drains resources and gets people tired. Let's widen the lens a bit. This isn't just about Samba. It's a case study in rapid response wildlife management in semi-urban spaces. The fact that Samba's sister, Tango, was recovered nearby might be a practical hint that these animals aren't wandering aimlessly but are following learned patterns, perhaps sticking to familiar routes or safe corridors near water. If you take a step back and think about it, What you're seeing is a concrete example of how institutions combine fieldwork, technology, and community involvement to handle something that's part novelty, part public safety concern. What's the bigger takeaway here? First, the public's role in wildlife events has evolved. People aren't just passive observers. They're informants, co-pilots in the search, and sometimes the first responders in a rural setting. Second, technology, drone surveillance, heat-seeking capabilities, and real-time reporting has become a standard component of wildlife response. And third, it's a reminder that even in a peaceful country village, the line between the familiar and the extraordinary can blur quickly when a capybara in the hedgerow becomes the town's topic of the day. So what should we watch for as this story develops? Likely a few things. Whether Samba is found near the water, any new sighting patterns from residents, and how the zoo communicates updates to keep the public both engaged and safe. If Samba does turn up, I'd expect a careful, staged recapture rather than a dramatic chase through the village, preserving animal welfare while keeping the community informed. And if Samba remains elusive, the next chapter will likely emphasize the data and patience, narrowing search zones, refining drone sweeps, and perhaps more nocturnal patrols when wildlife activity peaks. Before we wrap, a quick reflection: this story isn't just about a capybara escaping. It's a micro-example of how communities respond to the unexpected, how technology changes the tempo of search and recovery, and how professionals translate animal behavior into practical, humane outcomes. What this really highlights is that curiosity, collaboration, and careful communication can turn a wild moment into a coordinated, safe, and educational experience for everyone involved. If you found this interesting, tell me in the comments what you'd do differently in a similar situation. Do you think drone tech should be deployed earlier, or should teams rely more on on-the-ground tracking? And would you have been the person who spotted Samba at the ship inn, or kept a respectful distance? I'm curious to hear your takes and any local experiences you've had with wildlife surprises in your area.